All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Untherapeutic. Today, I'm super excited. We have a guest called Robert Mack, and I just cannot wait to dive into this topic of happiness. He is an expert in this field, and I'm going to let him share a lot about just his research, his work in this space. This is a topic that affects us all. I mean, all of us on our day-to-day lives say, hey, we want to be happy, right? But what does it really take to be happy? So Robert, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this line of work, and just take it away.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me and inviting me into the conversation. Nick, it's just really fantastic to connect with like-minded folks. So I wanted to say that first. So I work as an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert. I'm a celebrity happiness coach, a published author, and TV personality and producer. But really, I'm just a guy that wants to be happy like everybody else. Yeah. And I really struggled with that when I was young. From the age of about 6 or 7 years old, I remember just being stressed out and anxious. I felt so sort of alienated. I had an incredible family, loving family, but I just was deeply depressed. And I just always thought I'd grow out of it. You think, you'll make some friends. Yeah, exactly. I'll get good grades. Maybe I'll eventually make some money and maybe, have a girlfriend or whatever. And a lot of those things happened. Most of those things happened. I didn't become a professional basketball player like I wanted, but everything else, it's all good. We're doing okay nonetheless. Yeah. Despite, doing pretty well academically and athletically, relationally, socially, even financially, I just continued to feel worse and worse. And I got to a place where I was so depressed and I was experiencing suicidal ideation so often that I decided to do some research, and I looked at ways to kill myself, and I decided I was going to slash my wrist. So, I went in the kitchen, I got a steak knife, and I dug into my wrist. And, what's so strange is despite nothing on the outside changing, again, I had a pretty good life. I just didn't feel great for having this great life. When I rammed that knife into my wrist, I just felt this sort of inexplicable peace and joy and well-being and love and warmth just wash over me. So I decided at the time I was going to postpone the suicide for 10 minutes. It wasn't very long, man. Yeah, exactly. And even that I wasn't fully committed to, but I postponed it for 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, I started doing a different kind of research. I started looking up what happiness was and unhappiness, what depression was. And then slowly but surely, as I applied as much of what I was learning as possible, I found myself digging my way out of this deep, deep, dark, depressed hole that I sort of dug for myself. And now I look back and it's been a few decades, and boy, I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful for that. So I'm really just intent on sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I definitely want to learn about just everything that you've discovered in the research, but let's kind of go back to that space. In retrospect, is there anything that comes to mind that may have contributed to that depression?
Yeah, so many things, really one thing ultimately, but it was, sort of perfectionism. I was an empath, I had an incredibly loving, supportive family, but there was a lot of stress, like so many families. Okay. I think part of it is I maybe was wired high for anxiety. My nervous system was always felt like it was wired pretty high. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what it really was an obsessive, compulsive thinking and over analytical mind that just made a problem out of everything. And really good at solving problems, was also really good at finding problems and creating problems. So at the end of the day, it was really over.
The curse.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And so that was ultimately what it was for me. And I think ultimately for most people, if you dive deep enough, you'll find that there's often overthinking, overanalysis that leads or lends itself to depression and learned helplessness and even suicidal ideation.
Yeah. The perfectionism I know so many people struggle with, especially people who are high achievers, right? It's the gift and the curse, right? Because of the perfectionism, you operate with a certain level of excellence, but at the same time, you still feel inadequate, even though you're doing exceptionally well.
You just nailed it. That's absolutely right. Nothing is ever quite good enough.
Mhm.
Even if I remember so many times even getting a perfect exam or perfect score on an exam and still thinking, I guessed the number 17, though I didn't really know it, and or
You find the problem.
exactly, exactly. Or you think, well, next time I'm definitely not going to be able to get a perfect again, although I'm going to try for it. So, it's interesting. Often, perfectionists can find themselves better off objectively. So sometimes they do better off in the world, like you said, because they strive for excellence and they don't stop until they're really, you know, crushing it in some space, but they feel worse off subjectively. And because they feel worse off on the inside, that can get in the way of even better, greater performance. You
Mhm.
can see that with athletes, you see that with artists, you can see it with entrepreneurs and with business people, with all people. So, yeah, perfectionism looks like a good thing on the surface often, but when you dig deep enough, you find out very quickly that it gets in the way of actually better performance.
Yeah, it does. It really does. So take us on this journey. So you have this life altering experience, and I'm so thankful that you waited 10 minutes to kind of think about
I am too. We wouldn't have this conversation otherwise.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Seriously. So for anybody who's out there, just give yourself some time, think about it, right? But take us on this journey, right? So you have this life altering experience, and then kind of what happens next?
Yeah. So I started to read. I'd always been a reader, and even before this experience, the suicidal experience, I had read some books like the Psycho Cybernetics was a book I remember reading, and
Mhm.
um, how to win friends and influence people and things like that. And so I was sort of like returning to lots of this content, and then I was being a little bit more specific and intentional around the kinds of stuff I was reading. So in the beginning, I found um, that a lot of like the religious stuff that I was reading was not helpful.
Mhm.
And I wasn't quite ready for the scientific stuff, but I was interested in some of the self-help stuff and a lot of the new age stuff. So I remember pretty early on in this journey finding like Abraham Hicks, and
Okay.
Abraham Hicks was extraordinarily helpful for me, because it was just like a reminder that you deserve to feel good, you can feel good, your
Mhm.
birthright is feeling good and is happiness. And I leaned into that. So I used to listen and wear out those CDs. I used to read all their books, and it would lead me to one author and another author and another author. And I was just becoming obsessed with
Okay.
reading and listening to these experts. And I was applying as much of it as humanly possible. And I was tracking it. So I
Okay.
kept a little journal, and the things that worked, I tracked, and the things that didn't, I just let go of and I forgot. And later that actually became Happiness from the Inside Out, the
Yeah.
first book I wrote. But yeah, it was mostly a journey of like 2 steps forward, and then it felt like 13 or 300 steps backwards.
Wow.
It was in fits and starts that it happened, and I felt like I wasn't making any progress for a very, very long time. It felt like I was just recreating the wheel,
Okay.
so to speak.
Yeah, with the learning about happiness, because sometimes we become an expert, but then on the practical side, in terms of how it looks in our own lives, there's a gap. Did you experience any of that? Like, I know what it takes to be happy, but still personally, I'm struggling with the feeling of happiness.
Spoken like someone who's experienced some of this, Nick. For sure you do, and you
Yeah.
have. Yes, that's absolutely right. On the surface and from the outside looking in, you expect happiness to sort of look and feel a certain way. And
Mhm.
I experienced a lot of cognitive dissonance around that. Like
Mhm.
I should be smiling, I should be happy, I should be excited, and it's
Yeah.
fantastic. And that wasn't my experience at
I
all.
know everything to know about happiness, right?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. So there was a huge gap for a very long time, and the gap seemed so big that I never thought I could possibly bridge it. But I also had sort of made a commitment that either I was going to live blissfully or not at all. So that kind of single-minded focus was extraordinarily helpful.
Okay.
I just focused on that to the exclusion of almost everything else, and I started making some relatively significant and drastic changes in my life as well.
Okay.
So I said, "Well, this corporate job that pays so well that I hate so much isn't making me happier, so I'm going to let that
Mhm.
go." I
Mhm.
was living in a cold city. I knew I wanted to be in a warm city. I moved. So I started making these decisions that I wasn't crystal clear about, but I was just doing my best to sort of approximate or guess what would be helpful based
Okay.
on what I had read and based on what was feeling on the inside. But surely, step by step, things began to change. And at some point, I hit a tipping point, and all of a sudden, I woke up one day and I realized, wow, I haven't thought about killing myself for like a day or two. It was a
Yeah.
big shift for me.
Mhm. Do you believe that most people, when you said you made some steps, like I'm staying in the cold city. I need to move to a warm city. I got this great job. Let me change that. Do you think most people know what those decisions are in their life?
I think they know at least one of them. So and it's such a great question. Like when I was struggling with all this, I remember being very frustrated that I didn't know what my purpose was. And I was trying to figure out what to do with, as far as the life purpose. I didn't know what I wanted to do or should do professionally. I didn't know what to do in terms of my relationships, things like that. But the one thing I knew for sure is I love warm weather and I love sunshine, man. I love beaches and
Yeah.
oceans. I just always dreamt I'll live in Miami one day. That would just be amazing just to live in Miami. I just knew this one thing, but I kept questioning that because I was like, well, how's that going to solve all these other problems? And the truth is, I couldn't see it from there, and it didn't seem like it would solve any of those problems. But it
Mhm.
finally got an insight that was kind of like, well, if you hope or expect to receive more clarity or insight on what you should do next, you should at least act on the one piece of data that you know for sure right now. And for me, that
Mhm.
was just moving to Miami. That was it, right?
All else fails, go to Miami.
Exactly. And what's interesting is, just like I think it's that Martin Luther King Jr. quote, you don't need to see the whole staircase. You just need to see the next step. And that was the next step for me. So I took it. And then when I was in Miami, the next step lit up, which was a career in entertainment for a while.
Okay.
So I just sort of stumbled upon, a modeling and acting career for like 10 years.
Okay.
And it's just weird how things sort of begin to unfold organically when you take that first step.
Okay, that's awesome. Look, I got to ask you. So the biggest difference from the modeling and acting career versus the corporate career, what's the number one biggest difference for you?
Oh, it was the freedom and the flexibility, and the fun. I was having
Yeah.
so much more fun. I was so much more free, and I had such much more of a flexible schedule.
Hmm.
It was that piece. It was also that I was getting to connect with people in a way that I felt was more personal and authentic. I had a real difficult time being authentic in a corporate atmosphere. It just didn't feel like me at all.
Yeah.
On the other hand, not having a consistent paycheck was super scary, anxiety provoking.
It's a little stressful. You look up on the 15th and nothing hit your account. So
Exactly, exactly. And then I have to say that the people overall were probably a lot better looking as well in the modeling acting world. Sometimes not as beautiful on the inside, however,
mm,
right? So you got that going on. But yeah, it was really a quite dramatic shift in my life, and I really enjoyed it so much. Now, look, most of the time I didn't have enough money to really even buy meals and things like that. I mean, it was really tough.
yeah.
But I loved my life so much more, and I realized I could be so much happier with so much less than I thought I needed.
That's I think that in and of itself. I spent some time in Argentina and I realized that when I stayed there for 6 months and I remember having like all these suitcases and I'm like, I literally could have brought a small luggage and stayed for 6 months.
You just
So much
nailed it.
pressure we put on all this extra.
I just love that share right there, Nick. That's exactly right. Like when I moved to Miami, to your point, I had two beautiful German cars, had this
Mhm.
corporate job, I'm spending a lot of money, and I got to Miami, and then the corporate job went away, and um, you know, I couldn't find a job for a while. You know,
Mhm.
in between that, the corporate job and the entertainment stuff, I really couldn't find anything, and I traded the cars in essentially for a scooter. Okay, so Vespa, okay, not even a Vespa, like that's a brand name. It was Vespa. I had the cheap version, and I was so much happier. I had a little studio apartment, hardly any furniture in there, but I was so much happier. And I realized that clearly you don't need a lot to be happy.
Mhm. That's it. Let's dive a little bit more into happiness. At a baseline, how would you define happiness? Because when I think about happiness, I think about it being something that's fluid. Um, is there a universal standard for happiness?
Yeah, so I would say that our experience or our awareness of happiness is fluid, and
Okay.
therefore we feel it as a fluid or free flowing sort of experience that's sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes more, sometimes less.
Mhm.
But happiness, I think of as that thoughtless, wordless, faceless, formless, peaceful aliveness that exists within all of us at all times. At all times. It's always there. It's your true nature. It's my true nature. It's our true nature. And sometimes you're aware of it, sometimes you're not. The only thing that really ever gets in the way of it is thoughts and the associated feelings that we have. And so happiness is never out of reach. It's always closer to you than your own hands and feet, nearer to you than your own breathing. And it's just a question of it occasionally being obscured by
Mm.
thoughts and feelings. And so, in the same way that the sun always shines just as brightly as ever in the sky, but occasionally clouds obscure or veil that sunshine and your experience of that sunshine, happiness exists within you in this invincible summer within, the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, so to speak, always exists there,
Yeah.
not only within you, but as you. So I call happiness really a peaceful aliveness that exists um, within, behind, beyond, above, and below all thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, and experiences. So that's the way I define it a little differently
Yeah.
than most people would define it.
No, but that's good though. I want to go back. You said something about, our thoughts. What is the biggest, in your opinion, what is the biggest obstacle for people kind of being happy? In your experience and your research and your work with tons of people, like what have you seen gets in the way? What gets in the way most for people when it comes to them actually being happy?
Yeah, just a belief. It's just a belief that ever gets in the way, an erroneous belief. And usually the beliefs sound like, and I'd say the most destructive or challenging thoughts and beliefs are the ones that say that you are a mind, or you are a body, or you are your job, or you are your relationships. And
Yeah.
essentially, they all sound like you can't be happy without me. Like you can't be happy without this thing, this
Yeah.
job, this money.
This will make you happy. Yeah.
Yes, always. So everything and everybody in the world unintentionally and unwittingly makes a promise that it cannot keep, which is that I will make you happy, whatever it is, the money, the health, the job, the reputation, all of those things. And that's ultimately all understandable, but not true.
Yeah.
So, really, the primary thought is just an identification with the mind and the body. If you think that you are a mind and you are a body, instead of the fact that you have a mind, but you're not a mind, that you have a body, but you're not a body, that you're something that's aware of the mind and body, that recognition itself already is happiness.
Mhm.
And it's already the awareness of happiness. But most of us don't spend enough time in meditation or prayer or self exploration or introspection or reading wise teachers and authors to really come around to not just knowing that intellectually, as you mentioned before, but having it slip down into your heart so that it's something you experience. So it's experiential. So it's
Mhm.
existential, really, in a way, so that you feel it viscerally.
Yeah.
That's the important piece.
Yeah, so many times in the counseling space, I hear people come in and say, "Well, they're making me unhappy." Right? It's like I'll work with couples, and I'm unhappy because of him, and they'll say, "Well, I'm unhappy because of him or her or whatever." Right? But it's always the other person that's kind of at the core in their mind as to why they're unhappy.
You nailed it. I mean, so yeah, anytime we blame anybody or anything for our unhappiness or for the way we feel in general, we render ourselves powerless to do anything about it. Because if they're
Mhm.
responsible for the problem, they must also be responsible for the solution.
Yeah.
So I'm all about empowering people by reminding people that nobody and nothing can make you feel anything without your own consent.
Mhm.
So you're providing, and always you have the power within you to choose what you think, if you think, how you feel. That doesn't mean you always have the power immediately. Sometimes thoughts just occur to you, and then you can have a feeling, and you can be triggered. All those things are true, but whether or not you feed and fuel and entertain those thoughts and feelings is up to you. You have choice around that, lots of choice and lots of power around that. And so it's important to remember that no matter how valid you are, and you're all valid, we're all valid in what
Mhm.
we think and feel. Yeah, of course that person cut you off in traffic. Yeah, of course that person stole money from you. We're not, I don't want to for a second.
It gets you off, it's just yeah.
Exactly, like, perfectly fine. Like, welcome to being, human, and welcome back to the human race again. And you know, just because it's valid to feel what you feel, just because you're legitimate in feeling it, doesn't do anything other than ruin your present life, and it also begins to mess with your future life as well, right? So it makes you feel worse. And trust me, most people that cut you off in traffic, they're not thinking about you again. Meanwhile, you're
No,
sitting there drinking that poison, hoping that it kills them, kind of thing.
Exactly. You go home like, I still think about the guy in the blue truck, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then, as you know, all of a sudden we've got all these cognitive biases built into the brain, and
Mhm.
before long, between selective attention, selective perception, confirmation bias, behavioral confirmation, negativity bias, all these biases and just cognitive distortions that exist in the brain play into that. And next thing you know, you feel like everybody's cutting you off in traffic, everybody's taking advantage of you. You know?
You're like, I wish someone would cut me off today.
Exactly, exactly. Just like exactly, 100%.
Now you're cutting people off, right?
Exactly. There you go. Which is a great point too. Which is that that which we judge others for, we often have done to them, or we've done to ourselves. We've done to
Mhm.
ourselves. So we think, you made me mad, or you
Mhm.
disappointed me. No, not true. You
Yeah.
disappointed yourself. You made yourself angry about the thoughts you had about that person,
Mhm.
about that thing.
Yeah. In your book, you talk about unconditional happiness. And I love just that, the simplicity and unconditional happiness. Because when we think about happiness in a traditional sense, we think conditional, right? Like things that make me happy or this relationship that makes me happy. You talk about 8 principles. What are some of those principles?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of lazy intelligence. That's what I
Okay.
call it these days. At the time, I think it was calling it the path of least um, energy management. It's really the path
Mhm.
of least resistance. But the idea is, we all, be way lazier, but way smarter
Mhm.
in our approach to life, and in particular, our approach to happiness. So, in other words, instead of routing your happiness or how you feel through countless other people and things and activities, can you go directly to the source for it? Right. So
Mhm.
the most profitable business is the one that spends the least amount of money to make the most amount of money. That's
Mhm.
it. The most profitable person, the happiest person, is the one who spends the least amount of time, energy, and effort to get the most happiness, right?
Yeah.
So we're all these like little happiness industries, joy industries running around, and we don't think about it that way. But ultimately, whatever it is we want to achieve, accomplish, or acquire, we only want to achieve, accomplish, and acquire it because we think we'll feel better for having it. So instead of routing it through all these middle people and middle things and middle activities, go straight to the source for it. And that source is always within you, of course.
Yeah, I love it. When you think about just your travels, right? And obviously, here domestically, um, we see happiness and then we go to other places and we're like, wow, they seem so happy with so less. To your point, when you kind of put them all together, is there one trait that stands out more than any other trait in terms of people who are happy?
Mhm. I would say that it's an internal locus of control. It's
Okay.
probably the greatest, right? So the one thing we know we know lots of things about happy people. So break it down a little. So um, the one thing we know for sure about happy people is that they know and they live out this truth that success doesn't lead to happiness. So they don't seek their happiness in success. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean they're not successful, because
Yeah.
at the same time that happy people don't chase success and don't seek their happiness in success, their happiness and the fact that they're happy without the success leads to them being even more successful than their unhappy counterparts. So in other words, they live 67 years longer, they make $700,000 more on average over the course of their
Mhm.
entire lifetime than their unhappy peers. They get married earlier, stay married longer, and happier in all relationships, even if they're not married, right?
Yeah.
Despite whether they're married or not. So, in other words, success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness does lead to success. And happy people intuitively know that. Even if they don't know the research around it, there's a very strong, good sense within them that happiness is up to them and it's their choice. And so they actively actually practice leaning into more constructive, more supportive thoughts and stories about everything that's happening to them, or happening in their life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that there's that for sure. They don't believe or think that happiness is in the future or
Mhm.
in the world. They know it's in the present and it's within themselves.
Yeah. And this, you kind of already answered it, but it's almost the reverse. The people, I mean, what's the number one thing among unhappy people, right? Is it the exact opposite in terms of them kind of putting their happiness on this future, when I get here, or when this happens, or if this person, like these contingency clauses almost.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think Einstein said it in very complimentary way to your
Mhm.
point. Is that one of the most important questions, maybe the most important question you can ever ask yourself is, do you believe that you live in a friendly universe or not? It's part
Mhm.
of it, right? For lots of us, we think that the world and other people are against us. They have it out for us, that we can't trust them. And
Mhm.
folks that are happy generally don't think of it that way. They don't necessarily leave their doors unlocked and hand out their credit cards and social security numbers to everybody, right? But they at the same time they say, hey, it doesn't matter too much what the other people are up to. I'm going to stay in my own lane, do my own thing,
Mhm.
and focus on my own happiness. And then, interestingly enough, which we also know based on the research, happy people end up being more charitable and kinder and more generous. They donate more time and money and energy and blood to other people or social causes. But also, when they're doing that, it makes them happier.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's interesting because happy people focus on their own happiness, but not in a way that they become self-absorbed or self-consumed. It actually allows them to step outside themselves and share that happiness or whatever else they have with other people. So yeah, it can feel. I think at the end of the day, it's clear, with my experience at least, that
Yeah.
anytime I'm outsourcing my happiness to anybody or anything else, I'm going to find myself very unhappy. Like other
Mhm.
people are terribly unreliable sources of peace, love, and happiness. If
Yeah.
you haven't noticed.
Yeah. I have, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
For anyone that, let's just say, is suffering with depression or just kind of in this low place in life, or just wanting to be happy, right? They're doing all of these things. What's one piece of final advice for anyone who really wants to be happy, who really wants to kind of take themselves out of this dark place? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah. Well, I just want to compliment and reflect back to you, Nick. That's such a phenomenal question. And I would even say that's another way of answering that previous question. The
Mhm.
happiest people are deeply dedicated and committed to being happy above all else. And they know that's the real prize. Everything else is a consolation prize.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the folks that are really dedicated and committed to being happy, I'd say the first thing is um, remind yourself over and over again that that is your top priority, that happiness is your top goal, that everything and everyone is ultimately for the purpose of happiness. If you remember
Mhm.
that, you won't find yourself outsourcing it or routing it through other people, places, and things.
Love
Number
it.
two, yeah, go ahead.
And last but not least, where can people find you?
Yeah, so folks can find me, Rob Mack. You can find me at my website at coachrobmack.com. You can also find me on all social media platforms, including probably most notably Instagram
Okay.
at Rob Mack, Mack official. And you can find both my books, Happiness from the Inside Out and Love from the Inside Out, everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Yes, and we will put links to those books in the show notes, and then also on our social media as well. Hey, Robert, I appreciate you joining us today. Listen, I'm learning. I'm like, hey, I need to be more happy.
Hey, and you're also a teacher, Nick. There's no question about that, my friend. I appreciate you so much, and I mean this. Like, it's conversations like these, and it's people like you that prevented me, essentially encouraged me to not kill myself. Right? It's your teachings, it's these conversations, and it's the work that you do. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to another episode of Untherapeutic.